It's not been 24 hours since the Central Bank of Nigeria announced a 0.5% cybersecurity levy on all electronic transfers completed in Nigeria. In a circular signed by Chibuzo Efobi, the Apex Bank's Director of Payments System Management, and Haruna Mustafa, Director of Financial Policy and Regulation, CBN says the levy will come into effect in 2 weeks' time. It added that the deduction and collection of the cybersecurity levy is sequel to the enactment of the 2024 Cybercrime Amendment Act of 2024. For what likely implications and effects this levy could have on individuals and organizations, we're now being joined by the Chief Executive Director, Maxut Consulting Limited, Michael Odusami. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, are you content with the rationale of the imposition of this cybersecurity levy, whether it's in terms of how it will be collected or utilized?
Right. So collection, I think, is pretty straightforward. Most of the banks anyway, or the financial services industry, they do already collect various payments on behalf of the government, which they remit to the CBN or any of the agencies. So collecting is not a problem, but of course, this is a change for them. In the forum that I belong to, one of the biggest challenges, how are we going to implement this in 2 weeks, for example? You know, the payment services company and so on and so forth. So it is a challenge because of the timetable that this has come to. But eventually it's something that has to be done. It's the law of the land. So we've got to do it.
It has to be done.
Yes.
Well, as it's the law of the land.
Yes.
So as it's the law of the land, when it comes to policy, I always like to look at unintended consequences, because intended consequences are always obvious. Now, based off of your experience, what are some of the unintended consequences you think might roll out as a result of this new policy?
A lot of it. I mean, as you can see from the firestorm and all the headlines today, people see this as additional overhead on them in terms of cost, banking cost, and so on. People are already paying, complaining about the petrol crisis and so on and so forth. So this is additional cost for banking for everyone. One of the consequences of this could be people reduce their number of transactions they do electronically, and we start going to the branches to make payments or to make transfer to avoid, because this is a lot of money. If you're transferring, 50 million, say between two businesses, that's 250,000 naira already, that overhead that you did not account for. But let me just also say that it's not just the banking transactions. There are other sectors that are supposed to levy this 0.5% levy. Insurance, service providers, telcos, GSM providers are supposed to do it. I guess because the CBN brought their circular yesterday, that's why there's so much firestorm, and probably they're going to be the biggest contributor to this fund called the National Cybersecurity Fund.
Okay. Now, we do know that there are 16 bank transactions that are exempt from this CBN new cybersecurity charges. Is this something that you see as? I would like you to explain it for those that are not even sure how they might be affected, if they'll benefit from this.
Okay.
From everyday Nigerians, how does this those that are exempt from it, how does it translate to regular Nigerians?
Right. So you rightly said there are about 16 different transactions that are exempt. Salary payments, those are exempt. If you're transferring money between the same people within the bank on those transactions within the same bank, you don't need to pay this levy. If you're transferring to your own account in another bank, you don't pay for it. And there's a whole slew of other transactions that are listed there. So for the average Nigerian, if you only have one bank account, it means whenever you're making a payment to somebody in another bank, you're going to incur this levy. For companies, maybe you might have multiple different bank accounts that you use, then you might be able to avoid some of it if you're making a transaction from the same bank.
Right. Now, we're fighting inflation, allegedly.
Yes.
And when you look at a policy such as this, you've already listed out insurance, telcos, everybody transacts electronically. So the rationale is that business is going to transfer the burden to the consumer, meaning prices are going to go up. How do you make sense of this in your own analysis? Because, with one breath, we're fighting inflation, but with the other hand, we're sort of throwing some wood into the fire to make it all inflamed. How would you rationalize this?
The rationalization for me is that unfortunately, a lot of us don't pay attention. This is a law that was enacted in 2015. Where were we all? Why didn't we complain back then? We're only just starting to implement it now. That's why we're having these issues and this uproar. So we got to take it from that perspective that it's been around. We didn't raise our voices when it was being enacted. So we got to take it from that point of view. But you're right, there's a lot of firestorm. I see a lot of the, the kind of civil organizations actually raising their voices, thank you, about it. So we know that, I think we haven't heard the last of this, definitely. There's going to be a lot of pushback from the public, the masses, and so on, and the various sectors, interest groups are going to push back. And let's kind of see what happens. But I said at the beginning, this was enacted in 2015. It was signed by the President Jonathan back then. It's just until now that the CBN is now beginning to enforce it.
Now, when it comes to your assessment of this, the measures and the infrastructure that's already in place, does it justify this levy?
I think really for me, it's really like, what is this money going to be used for? Because the financial sectors, services sectors, the banking sectors, which I'm familiar with, they're already spending billions of dollars naira to fight cybercrime. So the question we should be asking, what are we going to do with this new fund? How accountable is it going to be? Because it's going to be under the National Security Advisor Office. So it's probably not going to be as transparent as maybe Nigerians should want it to be. So the question is, what are we going to do with this money? I think that needs to be spelled out more.
Absolutely, and in doing so, I'm glad you pointed out that banks are already spending billions for cybersecurity. Now, when you look at the United Kingdom, for example, the structure there is such that there's a collaborative effort. Private businesses are brought in, and they bring in millions worth of pounds of investment from all over the world to finance innovation in cybersecurity. What are some of the strategies that you think could have been better alternatives than just slapping a tax on people who are already on their knees financially?
Indeed. I think for me, it should be a lot more collaboration between the government agencies and the private sector. They have a lot of experience doing this. The banks, for example, they've been trying to protect their customers from fraud for God knows how long for. They have a lot of experience. A lot of the people that do implementation for the large organizations in this country, they're very familiar with implementing cybersecurity strategy. So I think there should be a lot more coordination between these different bodies to make sure that we actually get it right. I do know that the Act provides for forming of a council, cybersecurity council. So hopefully that could shed some bit of help to implementing this.
Now, when we're doing the newspaper review, you've already seen some of the pushback coming as a result of this. Based on your expertise, I'd just like you to predict how this situation could play out. Maybe two scenarios, one way or the other.
I wish I could predict the future. I do hope that a lot of the pressure, maybe on the CBN and some of the implementers, to kind of delay the implementation of this. We don't have to do this firefighting all the time to implement a policy. Giving organizations 2 weeks to implement a big, change like this, obviously is a little bit too short. So I hope that we can kind of delay that. The other part is maybe we can put some pressure on the assembly to actually amend this and actually maybe fund it, because the government should be funding this one way or the other from our taxes or whatever we do. It shouldn't have to be an additional levy on the people to make this happen. We see all over the world, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency in the US is an independent arm of the Defense Ministry. They don't ask anyone for additional fund to implement what they do.
And are you content with everything else you're seeing in the Cybersecurity Act? Because, of course, the original act is from 2015, and then it was reworked in 2023 to be re-signed 2024. There was a point of confusion there with this percentage. Before it says 0.005, and then it was now evolved to become 0.5%. So already, there's a sense that this was almost a rushed process. Are you content with it as a document, as an act?
I think as an act, I think it's necessary. I mean, what if people kind of take their time to read the whole document itself, it does actually provide some benefits to the country. You know, fighting cybercrime, that's a huge thing. We do need a coordinating body to do that. Interfacing with other governments around the world, we do need an agency or somebody to do that. So I can see that. And then what we call critical infrastructure. We don't seem to have much of that in this country, where maybe our water system, electricity system is all managed by computers and so on, and it's connected to the internet. And we have vulnerability from foreign attacks. I don't think we're really that much there yet. But I do see the value of the whole act in itself. It does have, I mean, there's a lot in it about cybercrime, even sending pornography, child trafficking, all of that is included in the act. So I could see the benefit of it and the rationale for it. But of course, it's the levy that's woken everybody up to what it's all about, the 0.5%. And that's probably just an arithmetic thing. You know, 0.5% is 0.005. That's really what it is. And some people started mixing them up. You know, that's really what it is.
Now, we have an idea how this could impact us on individual levels. But let's talk about how this is going to, you know, hit the small and medium enterprises, the SMEs. Given their potential vulnerability to additional financial burdens, when you already consider what the current economic situation is, is this going to do to them?
Well, the bottom line is this: it's an additional overhead on every business, both large and small. Like I said at the beginning, we don't want to discourage people from doing electronic transaction and actually resorting to going to the bank to perform transaction. I mean, the whole policy over the last, say, 10 years of the country or even longer is to encourage more people to do digital banking and so on and so forth. So putting additional overhead or cost on them, either as small business or as individual, it's not a welcome development, as we can see from all the fast stuff. But I did notice, and I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this right, there's an exemption on income tax from this amount that you're paying, but somebody needs to keep track of it, and so on and so forth. So maybe that could be some relief to individuals and small business to make sure that you can, at least you can remove those from your taxable at the end of the year. But how many people actually sit down to do that is a question.
Earlier you raised a point, and you said that, what is this fund going to be used for? What do you think this fund should be used for? Because when we say cybersecurity, everybody is thinking 419, the banking fraud and so forth. But I love that you brought other sectors into this. You talked about pornography. There's so many things encompassed in cybersecurity. Yes. What should this fund be used for?
Well, I mean, it definitely should help to better, I'll say, enable the government agencies that, like the coordinating agency, to be able to perform their duty better, either in terms of deploying new technologies or even working with the private sector to make sure that we have common infrastructure technology that we can all rely on, or even to educate the general public. Those are the kind of areas I can think of what this agency can do for us in the long run. Awareness, I mean, the banks are doing it for their customers, so maybe having a national body doing that as well would help.
It almost sounds like it's not necessary, that everything is happening already.
Yes, it's not, it's already happening. The private sector are doing that.
You said it's already happening, yes. But it's already happening, so, now we're adding more money to it, but it's all, the private sector is running with it already.
They're doing their bits about it. The part about intergovernment, for example, the private sector can't do that. They have to be through a Nigerian representation,
okay.
So that will happen.
Earlier, I asked you to predict.
Okay.
But now I'd like to ask you to go back in time. If you were at the center of this cybersecurity levy, how would you rewrite the process? What would you do differently, seeing how things have played out so far?
I think the first thing really is to make sure that there's a lot more involvement of the private sector at the beginning to even start this whole conversation around it. I'm not sure at the time, maybe in 2015, maybe there was an engagement or public discussion around this. I'm not too sure. But that should have been the real starting point so that everybody will have a role to play. Everybody will contribute to the entire strategy that we're working on. I also see constant engagement between the two, the government agencies, and not just the Security Advisor Office, the EFCC, the police, and so on and so forth, on the kind of public part of this equation. And then, of course, as a country, we also need, of course, the military to also be involved as a kind of defense against cybersecurity attack, which, we're probably not as vulnerable as some other countries, but it's something that we also need to prepare for.
And this is the second time you're bringing that up, and I love that you're doing that because, we've just come out of a counterterrorism summit that took place in Abuja just a couple of weeks ago. The conversation recently has been targeted a lot towards, cybercrime happening through platforms such as Binance, P2P platforms, and so forth. In your take, in your experience as a cybersecurity specialist, how much damage is really being done to our economy through these platforms? Because there's almost a sense that all of our troubles are being placed on platforms, the cryptocurrency platforms and so forth. How much of an impact are they really making on what is, the current economic situation that we see ourselves? Are they really the biggest player in devaluing the Naira, for example?
Oh, you mean the Binance? I'm not too conversant with the whole conversation on the Binance and cryptography, but, these are things that's happening not just in Nigeria, actually. Even Binance was in trouble even in the US against their, regulatory areas. But in terms of cybersecurity, which is I'm familiar with, whatever we do today in the digital system, either in your entertainment, in your banking, whatever you do, everything relies on security because your identity is now electronic. So it means if somebody compromises that or steals that identity, they can use it for other purposes. So that's why I think the entire infrastructure as we know it today is underpinned by cybersecurity, by securing that platform that we do. And it's going to get more. We're now having AI, we're having somebody being able to reproduce your voice, your picture, your images, your video, and do things that you were not even present for. So I think it's going to take on even a larger role. But again, this is really more of a private sector play rather than the government coming down on it, really. That's the way I see it.
Wow. Here we are.
This has been a very insightful conversation.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you for actually coming in and taking the time to be here and walk us through the CEO of Maxut Consulting Limited, Mr. Michael Odusami. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.